Good morning and welcome to the 24th meeting of the Education and Skills Committee in 2019. Can I remind everyone present to turn their mobile phones and other devices to silent for the duration of the meeting. Our first item, agenda item 1, is a declaration of interest from our new committee members. Can I put on record thanks to Joanne Lamont and Oliver Bandel, who have now left the committee, and I would like to thank them both for their contributions to the committee's work over the past few years. Joanna has been replaced by Mr Daniel Johnson, Oliver has been replaced by Miss Alison Harris, and Tavish Scott, who I thanked last week, has been replaced by Miss Beatrice Wishart. Can I welcome Alison, Beatrice and Daniel to committee, and can I ask firstly Daniel to declare any relevant interests?
I have no interest to declare.
Can I now invite Alison to declare any relevant
I have no interest to declare.
And can I finally invite Beatrice to declare any interest?
I probably should declare that up until this past Monday I was a councillor at Shetland Islands Council and I was a member of the Education and Families Committee.
Thank you very much. The next item of business, agenda item 2, is for the committee to choose a deputy convener to replace Joanne Lamont, who held that post. The Parliament has agreed that only members of the Scottish Labour Party are eligible for nomination as deputy convener for this committee, and I would invite members of that party to nominate one of their number for this post. Thank you. The committee agreed to accept the nomination for deputy convener for Daniel Johnson? Thank you. Can I congratulate our new deputy convener on his appointment? Next item of business, item 3, is a decision on whether to take agenda items 5 and 6 in private today. Are members content to do so? Thank you. And we now move to our 4th agenda item, which is the Scottish Qualification Authority performance and role, and it's our evidence session with the SQA on its performance and role. And can I welcome to committee for the first time since being appointed in the post, Fiona Robertson, Chief Executive of Scotland's Scotland's Chief Examining Officer, John McMorris, Director of Business Development, and Robert Quinn, Head of English, Languages and Business at the SQA. And can I invite Fiona to make a few brief opening remarks?
Thank you very much and good morning to you. So I'd like to thank the committee for the opportunity to attend today to discuss the SQA's role and performance and the 2019 SQA National Qualifications results. And we've submitted a paper in advance to inform the discussion. It's a great privilege to have been appointed to the role of Chief Executive of SQA and Scotland's Chief Examining Officer at the end of July this year. As you know, the SQA is the national accreditation and awarding body in Scotland, and the Education Scotland Act 1996 sets out its functions and the governance arrangements to oversee SQA's distinct accreditation, regulatory and awarding responsibilities. SQA plays a key role in the education and skills system in Scotland and is committed to working with and across the system to help learners realise their potential and achieve their ambitions. I was very conscious on SQA Results Day this year, so early in my tenure as Chief Executive, of the huge responsibility SQA has to young people and their families right across Scotland. And of course we take this responsibility very seriously, ensuring we deliver year on year for learners and assessing our performance against our 9 strategic goals. We have a distinct responsibility to uphold the reliability and accessibility and credibility of Scotland's qualification system and maintain standards over time. And we work closely with others from schools, colleges, employers, training providers and universities to industry, professional bodies, national bodies, teaching unions and government, so really right across the system. And we very much value these partnerships, working towards our shared goal of delivering a first-class education and training experience for our learners. On 6 August, 133,000 learners across Scotland received the results across a wide range of qualifications from National 2 to Advanced Higher, awards, Skills for Work courses, National Progression Awards and National Certificates. This, of course, represents the culmination of learning by Scotland's young people, supported by educators, parents and carers, and these young people are to be congratulated on their achievements. Some variation of attainment is to be expected between subjects and over time, and in 2019 there was an increase in attainment at National 5, or attainment A to C attainment rate, decrease in attainment rate at higher and advanced higher. High quality learning and teaching remains a fundamental component for the successful delivery of qualifications to ensure candidates are well prepared across all aspects of every course they undertake. And SQA will continue to work with teachers and lecturers, schools and colleges to support them in the delivery of our qualifications for the benefit of young people across Scotland. And we will of course identify any additions to our programme of continuous professional development for teachers and lecturers. It's worth highlighting that we've started publishing the course reports for all national qualification subjects delivered in the 2018-19 session, and these reports, which will be available on each subject's web page, provide qualitative information on the performance of the assessment components of the course, with a focus on areas that candidates performed well in and areas that candidates found demanding. And these reports also provide detailed advice and guidance on preparing candidates for future assessment. Information on the grade boundaries set for each course is also provided. These reports are intended to be constructive, informative, and to promote better understanding of the standards required for course assessments. We also run a coordinated programme of support to help teachers and lecturers understand the requirements of the revised assessments, and of course this year that will be advanced higher. I would acknowledge that in the past the committee has criticised the SQA for its engagement with teachers and lecturers. Our submission to the committee provides some detail on how we have sought to respond to the recommendations, in particular around ensuring our engagement and communications is effective and responds to the needs of teachers, parents and learners. Of course, we need to keep this under close review, particularly as we implement further changes. I am heartened by recent work and positive survey results, but there is always more we can do to ensure our communications and engagement are as effective as possible. And I want to ensure, as the new Chief Executive, that SQA is seen as a listening and open organisation. To conclude, I'm proud to lead an organisation of dedicated, committed professionals who have led and delivered a very significant programme of reform to our qualification systems in recent years. We're committed to ensuring we continue to deliver and work collaboratively with the system for the benefit of learners. Thank you. I'll try and answer all your questions.
Thank you. I think there will be quite a few questions this morning. Can I move first to Mr. Gray?
Thanks very much, Convener, and good morning to the panel. In the past, the committee has expressed some concerns about the balance that's struck between the SQA's responsibilities to the exam system in Scotland and their international work. And I'd have thought, as a new Chief Executive, perhaps you would be looking at that balance, and I just wondered what view you had come to.
Okay. So, the work that we do in Scotland is by far the greatest focus that we have. And the work that we do outside Scotland is focused largely on our work in the vocational sector. It's been some long-established international work that we have done. It does not dilute the work that we do in Scotland. It is quite separate from the work that we do in Scotland. My colleague John can say a little bit more about the detail of that. And it brings in some income to us, thereby reducing our reliance on the public purse. There's a broader piece here around the role of education being a kind of force for good, more internationally, and I think we've been working with a number of countries over a number of years to promote Scottish education, to encourage knowledge transfer, and to and aligned with the Scottish Government's international framework as well. So it's very much part of our work, but of course the focus absolutely, as far as our function is concerned, is and continues to be on Scotland.
So, I mean, you mentioned income there, and according to the organisation's strategic goals, one of them is to raise income to reduce dependence on the public purse. So could you tell us how much income your international work achieves?
So our international work brings in about £2.4 million in the last financial year, 18-19.
a turnover of?
Around 90 million.
Okay.
So it's a small amount. In the some variability over time, over the last few years as new contracts have come in and others have concluded. Okay. But it's been a small proportion of the total over time.
There's been some criticism recently in the press of the travel and accommodation that's involved in the international work. Business class flights, luxury hotels, all of that. Do you intend to change all of that?
So we employ a number of people who are focused on our international work, and as part of that international work, they undertake overseas travel. That's part of their job. It's part of their job to do that. That's within the existing international travel and subsistence guidance that we have, and individuals have worked within that guidance. There is a planned review of that guidance, and that review is going on at the moment. But I think it's important to highlight that individuals have worked within the existing guidance, and all budgets and spending has been approved in the normal way and in the way that you would expect for a public body to operate. And indeed that expenditure has been audited in the normal way.
So the way you describe that makes it sound as if those involved in this international travel are a separate part of the organisation working on international contracts. But that's not actually true, is it? Because a lot of the instances which have been carried in the press recently have been members of the senior management of SQA who clearly don't have a particular responsibility for the international contracts. Their responsibility is across the whole organisation. So that's not really true then, is it?
It is true. The work that we do, the income that we... Sorry,
you said there are staff working on the international contracts who do this travel, but actually it's been senior management staff who've been involved in some of these examples, isn't it?
So some senior management have undertaken some travel as part of the work that SQA does and continues to do. But the work that is undertaken through our international function is the income that we generate pays for the function within the SQA. Absolutely. Now, I guess what you're alluding to there is that, of course, as part of the work that we're able to do overseas is building on the expertise that we have and the work that we're doing elsewhere. That would be true, absolutely. And of course, there will be some senior management time that is devoted to our international work. But the point I made remains that the work that we do internationally pays for itself and brings some additional money into the SQA, which offsets our reliance on the public purse.
So I appreciate that, but isn't it the case then, if the travel and accommodation that we're talking about was undertaken more economically, then the profit on that international work would be greater, and so the return or the reduction in the dependence on the public purse would be greater?
You're right that the costs attached to our international travel are relevant to the net income that comes into, absolutely, in terms of the offsetting the grant and aid that we get, and we have guidance which applies, and budgets are approved in the normal way. So every public body has guidance relating to its both domestic and international travel. So does SQA. That guidance is currently under review, and we will consider any changes to that guidance in the normal way. But as things stand, international travel has been undertaken within guidelines. That is the advice that I've had both from the previous accountable officer and from my colleagues.
So these guidelines are under review internally in the SQA?
Yes, a planned review.
So you would expect that guidance to change then?
the guidance may change, but it's subject to review, and all parts of that guidance will be considered as part of that review. I think it would be wrong for me to draw any conclusions about the outcome of that review. As part of that review, we will be benchmarking our existing guidance with other organisations, including the Scottish Parliament, including other public bodies, and the guidance that they use. In the meantime, we are working for international subsistence purposes. We're working within FCO guidelines.
Okay.
Quick supplementary from Ms Mackay.
Supplementary, just on that, the review, has it started, and what's the timescale when you expecting
it to finish?
Started,
and I would expect the review to be concluded by the end of October and implemented by the middle of November.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mr Greer.
Thank you, Convener. I should put on the record that I had a meeting with Mr McMorris on Friday that's relevant to the issues that we're going to discuss this morning. It was useful and I'm grateful for it. Earlier this year, the SQA were asked under Freedom of Information Law to provide details on the travel and accommodation expenditure that Mr Gray has mentioned. That raised eyebrows and in and of itself has been covered. But as was covered in this weekend's Sunday Mail, the information that was provided wasn't complete. It didn't include spending incurred by senior managers or corporate credit cards. Now, the journalist who requested that, Gordon Blackstock, had to subsequently request the credit card spending again under FOI, and it was only released after an appeal, after he'd narrowed his scope, because the SQA argued that his initial request would have incurred too much expenditure. Now, I understand why some travel and accommodation costs are going to go onto corporate credit cards. If a hotel has a policy that you pay on departure, for example, understand that. But why was that information not released when it was first requested under Freedom of Information Law? And why were you not aware that travel and accommodation had been paid for on your corporate credit cards?
So I'll start and perhaps turn to my colleague John McMorris just to provide a bit more detail. So my understanding was there was an FOI request back in March, April time, which obviously predates my tenure in the organisation, around travel and subsistence. And that travel and subsistence information was taken off the travel booking system information that exists within the organisation, which does relate to individuals. So that information was provided in good faith as the material, in response to the material requested. A subsequent FOI request was raised, I think, in late June, early July, which asked for credit card information. And I think it's fair to say we subsequently realised that that information was not exactly the same as the information provided through the travel booking service. And there are a number of reasons for that, which we provided in full to the journalist concerned. But I think a couple of things to highlight. All the budgets and credit card spend is approved as members would expect in terms of our responsibilities as a public body, and are subject to audit in the normal way. But the management information did not allow us to provide, or did not allow us to provide that complete information, and the booking system was provided initially. I don't know if John wants to add any further information in terms of clarity.
Well, I think, as I mentioned last week, that all of the flights have been booked through the procurement framework. There were some instances where the procurement framework didn't suit to book some hotels, so staff within policy were allowed to book directly on their credit card, and that was fully trackable through our accounts ledger. So it's not that we're trying to hide anything, it was just it was missing from the original information request, as Fiona said. So what changes are you making in your process now to ensure that you are as transparent and open as is expected of a public body? Because this information was requested under Freedom of Information Law and it was not provided in full, because some of it was going on credit cards that were simply not being tracked because it was not part of the booking system. I accept what you say about they're audited in the normal way, but information was requested on your international travel and accommodation. It was not provided in full. You've subsequently realised that and realised it was because this was going through credit cards and not the booking system. What changes are you making in your systems to ensure that that doesn't happen again and that you live up to those transparency expectations?
So the issue around transparency was in relation to individual spend and the way that that's recorded in the management information system. So as I've said, we are undertaking a review of our travel and subsistence arrangements. I make no statement about whether the guidance will change, but we will consider it in the context of other public bodies. Our overall average spend overseas per night is about £137, which is well within FCO limits across many
Forgive me, Ms Robertson, I'm not, in this instance, I'm not asking about whether or not the travel and accommodation that was incurred was acceptable or not. That's a separate debate and one we need to have. The point here is about accountability and the fact that you didn't provide that information when it was requested under FOI law. How are you going to change your process to make sure that in future you do provide it?
So the information that was difficult to provide under, or proved difficult to provide under the FOI request that came forward was in relation to individual spend. And we are looking to see whether our management information system can ensure that that individual spend can be provided. But as I say, individual spend is approved in the normal way and is subject to audit requirements in the normal way, and we are and total spend information is available. So I think I would want to highlight that this is I understand the point about individual spend not being readily available. But I would like to consider in the context of our normal annual accounting and audit requirements that we are transparent. But we're happy to look at this for the reasons that you've highlighted.
I think that'd be helpful, and it would be helpful for the committee to have a written explanation from yourself of how, in this review that you're taking forward, you are going to consider the questions that have been raised around accountability here.
Happy to do that.
Moving on, as has been mentioned, the SQ operates commercially in a number of countries that have, frankly, indisputably poor human rights records. Can you briefly confirm what checks and impact assessments you conduct before signing a contract in any of these various regimes?
So I'll make a couple of initial points and then hand over to John, who will be able to talk about this in more detail. So in approving the centres anywhere in the world, they go through the same process and procedures as we would expect in Scotland, and I think that's really important. So that any requirements that we would have of a centre in Scotland, we would expect more broadly, and we also take into consideration any FCO guidelines relating to international trade across different jurisdictions as well. John, I think, will be able to take you through in a little bit more detail the issues around those processes.
Yes, so obviously we work within the Scottish Government policy in protecting human rights internationally, and as part of that, our international engagement is seen as an opportunity through educational exchange to share our experience and spread the promotion of human rights values and respect of human rights values. So a lot of the human rights considerations are kind of embedded in our systems. So as Fiona said, when we operate any centre anywhere in the world, good guidance from the United Nations for businesses operating in multiple jurisdictions is to ensure that you spread your human rights values across all of your operations equally, and that's something that we align absolutely to. So any time a centre comes forward to become an approved SQ centre, that we have specific criteria looking for example, equal opportunities policies. We look for and we insist on documented procedures to ensure candidates have equal access to assessment, and that no individual can be discriminated against for any protected characteristics. So in that way, our policies absolutely line up to the expectation that United Nations and we would have in our international human rights frameworks within Scotland. There's ongoing monitoring of those centres as part of our quality assurance and verification processes. We also build in any new centre that's approved has to have a centre operating agreement, and that reflects the latest in legislation. So we've amended that over the years and do so on a frequent basis as legislation changes, incorporating things like modern slavery, Equalities Act, and any good best practice that we would expect of our centres in Scotland.
it was useful to hear you bring up human rights in that level of detail. In the summer of 2017, it was announced that the SQA would partner with TETEC to provide IT training for employees of the Saudi Arabian regime, including its defence ministry. So that was 2 years after the Saudi Arabian bombing campaign of Yemen began. That's a campaign that's killed thousands of children. It's left millions more to face starvation. Can you explain to the committee what checks and assessments you've made before delivering training to the Saudi regime and its defence ministry?
Yes, so the specific example for TTEC, I was involved in that myself, and the early conversations, what we offer with TTEC is a range of entry-level IT qualifications, broadly equivalent to SCQF Level 2. The initial aims of those courses were to increase female participation in the labour market and also to help with their youth employment. And so we took the view that these obviously spreading female participation in the labour market is a positive thing. That's fitted with what I'd mentioned earlier around the human rights framework to promote equal opportunity, and we felt that at that moment in time that was a positive thing.
Just to confirm, Mr McMorris, sure. This is a contract you're providing to train employees of the Saudi Arabian government?
Well, it's an SQA centre. TTEC have become an SQA centre. They're a centre of many awarding bodies in the UK, and their customer base, yes, is various ministries and also private organisations to try and teach
this is training
skills.
Provided to employees of the Saudi Arabian government. On the 9th of August last year, Saudi warplanes bombed a school bus in Yemen. They killed 42 boys from the ages of 6 to 11 and 11 adults. It was a war crime. Do you know whether the Scottish Qualifications Authority trained anyone involved in the department of the Saudi Arabian regime that was responsible for that war crime?
Well, to date, there's been no certifications of that particular programme. There's been registrations, two-thirds of which have been female, but as of yet, our quality assurance processes are still reviewing the assessment criteria of the students, so no one's been certificated as of today.
My understanding is that around 44,000 employees of the Saudi government are going through this training. So in October 2016, before you signed that contract, the Saudi regime bombed a funeral in Sana'a and they killed 155 people. They struck it once, they waited a few minutes for rescuers to arrive, and then they bombed it again to kill as many people as they could. Civilians, not a military target. Again, that was a war crime. It was committed before you entered into a contract with the Saudi Arabian government. At any point since you have entered into that contract, have you re-evaluated your relationship with them?
Well, TTEC's a private organisation in Saudi, and we keep all of our centres.
They deliver training to the Saudi Arabian government. The training, the SQA qualification being delivered, is being delivered to employees of the Saudi government. Have you done any assessment of what those employees are doing?
No.
Why not?
As I said, the candidate entries are very low, and we haven't as yet certificated any candidates. So it's going through a quality assurance process.
You've been doing this for years. You started doing it after they started committing war crimes. You're doing it for their Ministry of Defence. You're training their employees. They are killing children. You're an education authority of the Scottish Government. Why have you not checked that?
All of our work that we do internationally, we always seek the latest advice from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office as part of our assessments. We are committed to improving outcomes for learners, and as I said, the aims of that particular project with that private organisation TTEC is to help female participation in the labour market. And as
female
part
participation in the Saudi Ministry of Defence committing war crimes. I don't consider that an adequate answer, that you're focused on the outcome for the learner. You're providing training for employees of a government. That means a line of responsibility from that government's actions to yourselves. And you're saying that you have not checked what those employees are doing, what they're doing with the training that you provide. Why not?
Well, as I said, these are very low-level entry qualifications to help encourage people that have been unemployed and people that are females to participate in the labour market. We do, under the human rights framework from Scottish Government, if there are human rights concerns, it doesn't necessarily mean that you wouldn't engage in that particular country, and it's only through positive engagement.
Other Scottish Government departments have reviewed their relationship
change
with the Saudis. Scottish Development International, after the murder of a journalist, Mr Khashoggi, they did review their relationship and they decided not to go ahead with the trade envoy that they had been planning on. Other Scottish Government departments are reviewing their relationship with the Saudi regime. I consider it completely inadequate that the SQA are not. And given that clearly that's something that you've not planned to do up until now, I would expect a written explanation to be provided to the committee in future, imminently, on what you intend to do about that. It does not appear that you conduct anything like the appropriate human rights checks before entering into or during any of your international contract work. And that is not acceptable for a Scottish public body. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Greer. If you could... Yes, sorry, Mr Robertson.
So I think we'd be happy to provide further information. I mean, I think it's important to highlight that the processes and procedures that we take forward are very much in line with other public bodies, and we do as much due diligence as possible. But we're happy to provide further information. As John has said, this is a private provider, and there are obviously constraints as to how much we can do to provide further oversight. But I'm happy to provide some more information to the committee.
I think that would be very welcome. Very quickly, Mr Johnson, as I think we've...
Yes, so Mr Robertson, I just want to ask you about a point that Mr McMorris just raised there. He said that if a human rights concern was raised in your checking, that would not necessarily mean that you would disengage from activity in a particular country. Is that the position of the SQA? Because that seems like it seems strange to me if that is the position of the SQA.
It's direct guidance from us.
Sorry, Mr McMorris, I was asking Ms Robertson.
I think cultural and educational exchange can, are a force for good. So there's something here about the role of Scottish education in being that force for good. I absolutely acknowledge the committee's concerns about human rights issues, and of course we would share those concerns. And what we're seeking to do through the work that we do is to promote the excellence of Scottish education overseas. We obviously do keep our contracts under review. They'll continue to be under review. But that's the position that we've taken. And the SQA has been doing work overseas for 30 years. One of our the work is supported by the strategic goals that we've agreed with the Scottish Government, and we feel that the international work broadly is aligned with the international framework, which has been developed by the Scottish Government. But we're happy to provide some further information on that work, if that would be helpful to the committee.
Ms Smith?
Thank you, Convener. Could you put on record for the committee what the difference is between marker appointments and the number of markers? Could you tell us the difference?
Yes. Robert will be able to go into greater detail than I, but the distinction is that a number of individual markers may be responsible for more than one qualification. So if a marker just for the sake of argument, you have a marker for English higher and advanced higher, that would count as 2 appointments.
Okay, could you tell me how many of your staff, how many of your markers are doing 2 different qualifications?
So we have, I think, about 7,500 markers and just over 12,000 appointments. So a significant number of our markers undertake more than one appointment. And that can be on a variety of qualifications and external assessment activity. But Robert, do you want to say more about that?
And it can also be extended over the examination cycle. So someone might mark a piece of coursework in April, May time, and then they also might mark an examination script later on in the year.
So have you seen a growth in the number of markers who are participating over different exams?
Not particularly. I think it's always been a tradition that people sometimes take the opportunity to mark at different levels, and indeed different papers if the examination procedures timetable allows it.
Okay. Can I ask about the letter that Jackie Folds sent to the Local Government Committee in June of this year, where she said that there were 14,153 marking appointments And in your response to me yesterday to a parliamentary question, you said that the number of marker appointments was now 12,450. That's quite a reduction in the number of marking appointments over a period of just a year. Are these correct figures?
I'm sure they are correct figures. If I may, I'll come back. If I can come back to you on that, because there have been some changes to the management information system that oversees marker appointments. So a timeline. I responded to a parliamentary question that you asked. I think in a letter to you dated yesterday around the numbers that you provided, and a run of data was not possible because of some changes to the management information system that governs. So I'd be happy to come back to you on the detail of that.
Can you tell me the number? In Ms Fall's letters, she says that there are 6,208 teacher markers. What was it for this year?
I think it's about 7,000. If I may, I'll come back to you on the detail of that, just so that I just want to be absolutely correct on that.
Okay. Now, in your parliamentary response, you said that 794.
Yes.
Is that marker appointments that were withdrawn during the course of this year? So that's not the number of...
Not of individuals.
So that's the marker appointments. Can you tell me why 794 were withdrawn, having applied, obviously, to take part in marking? Why was there that level of reduction over the period of a year?
My understanding is that the withdrawals can be for a number of reasons, both teachers withdrawing or indeed their appointment being withdrawn by the SQA. It can be a combination of factors. Robert might be able to say a bit more, but there are a number of reasons underneath that number.
Yeah, I mean, I would say quite a lot of it's a moving feast in terms of marking, and also teachers' time and time availability is a moving feast, and quite a lot of teachers, when they sign up for marking, then maybe re-evaluate it, and quite often there's change as we move towards the point where we are finalising our marking teams. So there are a number of markers that withdraw themselves as part of that process. But also our marking approach has changed quite a bit over the last 10 years, and now the marking process is now in the main in terms of question papers. Our papers are marked online, on screen, and markers are given. There's ongoing feedback from markers during that marking process. And that's intended to ensure that we catch any issues with marking earlier in the process, quality assurance, as opposed to the old approach, which was more quality control. If you discovered some issues with marking at the end of the cycle, that would require a full remark of their scripts, and that could be very challenging at the end. So there's more ongoing interaction, and if we can't get them, if a marker can't get on standard, despite the support that we give them, then ultimately we sometimes have to withdraw that marker to ensure that we're fair to candidates and the scripts are marked accurately. So it's a combination. I would imagine it's a combination of things, both teachers withdrawing or switching, and also the actual system itself withdrawing markers as we go through the process.
Sorry, I'm particularly interested in this because this is a reduction over 2018 to 2019. And in her letter to the Local Government Committee, Jackie Falls went on to say that she felt that the issue of ensuring that there are sufficient markers in place is very challenging, I think was her phrase.
Yeah.
So, Mr Quinn, you're saying that in some instances, the marker themselves volunteers to come away from it for a variety of different reasons. But you also said just now that SQA might no longer want their services. Now, if we've got a very challenging system in place because we don't have enough markers and people, I'm concerned about that, and I'm sure parents are concerned about that. So what are the main reasons why we've had this decline?
Yeah. I don't think it's fair to say that SQA don't want their services, but also if a marker exceptionally we can't get a marker on standard during the ongoing marking process. Every marker is assigned a team leader. A team leader has about 8 markers. and that team leader will work with these markers through the process. The team leader will have access online to the scripts that they're marking.
Have you got enough markers to be on standard?
Yes. And indeed, what we want to do, and I think what Jackie Faulds was alluding to, is we want to do more to actually work with markers who we maybe don't quite get on standard. So we might want to look at some approaches we might want to take in future years in terms of potentially retraining or supporting markers who haven't met the requirements, so that we can use them again, so that we don't have the situation where markers who are not on standard we can't use again. Traditionally there was a situation where if a marker was kind of graded what we call a C marker, i.e. we weren't happy with the marking, we didn't use them again. Now, obviously, with scarce resource, that's an issue. So we need to look at ways of ensuring that we maximise the expertise within our marking pool.
Sorry, I'm confused about this, Mr. Quinn, because it's my understanding, and certainly from Ms. Robertson's predecessor, Janet Brown, that there has been an increase in the number of qualifications that obviously young people are undertaking.
Yes.
Therefore, that begs the question that there would be more marking appointments, surely.
Yes.
Yet we've got fewer, is my understanding, between the letter that Ms. Robertson gave me and the one that Jackie Fold sent to the local government committee, and you're telling me we've got enough. Something doesn't tie up here.
Well, we have enough in the sense that we've successfully delivered the examination diet, but we also recognise we need to continue to do what we can to maximise our marking pool and to support our teachers who want to take up marking opportunities. I think in terms of the revised qualifications, in terms of the qualifications that were brought in to support CFE, there was a greater focus on coursework and the requirements for people to, or for candidates to undertake some coursework, which is carried out earlier in the session. So there is a greater instance of people marking coursework and then marking question papers.
So just to be absolutely clear on this, of the 12,450 marker appointments for 2019, i.e. this year, the 794, what were the reasons for these appointments declining? As in being withdrawn from. These are, as I understand it, these are appointments that are primarily agreed to be markers in this diet, but they didn't happen. What's the reason behind that?
It's very difficult for me to say what the exact reasons for a teacher withdrawing are, but in the main, it can be anything to do with their own time constraints or changing circumstances and such like. You know, but sorry.
Possible for you to provide further statistics along those areas to the committee. I think that would be helpful going forward.
We certainly know about the markers that we withdrawn, but we don't know the reasons for why markers who we didn't withdraw decided not to.
May I suggest that I think we should know, because it's a critical issue. I mean, obviously, the key thing, SQA can't function unless it has the right number of markers available or marking appointments available for the relevant number of qualifications that young people are taking. And there have been issues about these marking procedures over the last few years where we've had issues with specific subjects. So it would be very helpful, Convener, if we can get these details.
I think we can provide some further information there. I mean, I think year on year, we will see a level of turnover in markers for a range of reasons, including retirement and other, there can be a range of issues in the marker cohort. And as Robert said, it's an ongoing activity to recruit and provide professional development and training for our markers. And actually, certainly in the conversations I've had with teachers over the years, and I'm sure Robert too, many teachers see this as a very positive continuous professional development opportunity working with us. But it is a time commitment, and it's not there for everyone. But we are very keen to ensure that we have the markers that we need, and that's an ongoing activity during the course of the year.
Okay, thank you. Ms Goldruth.
Thank you, Convener. I should probably make members aware that I was formerly an SQA marker for standard grades and for higher. In terms of, just picking up on Liz Smith's line of questioning there with regard to these markers who have fallen away, I suppose I'd be one of them as well. Well, in terms of the experience that you might expect from these markers, is there a baseline there? Because I think when I first started marking in 2010-11, you had to have been teaching for 3 years. Is that still the case in terms of the experience you would expect from classroom teachers?
It's 2 years.
2 years, right? Okay.
Yes, teaching the qualification for 2
And
years.
in terms of some of those people who are falling away, presumably some are retired teachers.
Yes.
If you have retired, is there a kind of expectation that if you've retired after a certain number of years, you're not allowed to mark because you've been out of the classroom for too long?
I think there is.
Yeah,
Yes.
there is. Normally, pardon me. Normally, there is if someone's not been marking for 3 years or so, sorry, not been teaching for 2 or 3 years, then we would withdraw them, and so there's a kind of process where a marking team is refreshed on an ongoing basis.
Yeah. I'd like to look a wee bit at the changes to the course specification. When the committee met with a group of teachers in Dunfermline, I think that was earlier this year, was it last year? We had a kind of informal conversation with some teachers in Fife about changes to course spec throughout the year. And one of the concerns they flagged with us was that this was being communicated to them during the academic year, potentially as late, I think some of them said as November, which had impacted on what they were delivering if there were substantial changes to the course spec. Is that still happening?
No. I mean, I think there were changes that we had to put in place as a part of the revised national qualifications as a result of the removal of units and the changes to national qualifications. And our approach there was that we published all the mandatory documents in April. That's the core documents and specifications to allow people to understand the standards. The course content and the aims and skills and knowledge of these courses hadn't changed, and therefore were still relevant. But we published all the mandatory documents in April, and then between June and September, we then published the supporting assessment support. We prioritised the areas of greatest change. So, for example, if there was a new piece of coursework was added to a qualification, then we prioritised the assessment support within that window for that piece of coursework, and we deprioritised the areas where there was no change or very little change because the existing assessment support was still valid. That was us working within the fairly challenging timelines we were set in the context of the Cabinet Secretary's decision to remove units and the timeline that was agreed in order to do that. And I have to say our own staff and indeed the teachers that we work with did a great job in actually delivering that to time. But moving forward, and I think this is probably where your point's important, moving forward in terms of when we have more control of our own destiny in the context of timelines, we would like to see the situation where we're making substantive changes to a course, a national course, that we have all the documentation, including the assessment support, in place a full year before the first delivery. So that's something that we, as a qualification development management team, have decided, and it's something that we want to apply. So. For example, we're developing a new higher in application of mathematics, which supports, I think, the success story of the National 5 application of mathematics in terms of uptake and greater engagement with it. And that new national course will follow these revised guidelines. So all the documentation will be in place 1 year before first delivery to allow teachers then to have the appropriate professional learning and conversations associated with the delivery of that qualification.
Just to pick up on that point about the removal of outcome and assessment standards, because that ongoing assessment is not happening, well, it's not being monitored by SQA, maybe I would expect it would be monitored at school level. Have you noticed any changes in terms of your presentation levels? Are they moving in the right direction, or are kids being presented for the wrong level of qualification because those outcome and assessment standards aren't there anymore?
I think we are moving in the right direction in terms of appropriate presentation. I think there's been a lot of effort and discussion about appropriate levels of presentation, and I think in the main teachers are using formative approaches to judge the readiness of their candidates, as well as more formal approaches that they may take. Of course, there might be some areas where there's some concern over the number of no awards in a subject, but I would think the statistics from the last couple of years' diet would show probably an improvement picture in terms of appropriate presentation. There are lots of pressures on teachers sometimes in some subjects. For example, because you want the subject to be run in your school, some of the more specialist subjects, you'll only run the higher. Where actually for these young people it might be better if you had ran or they had been offered both the National 5 and the higher. But I would say to answer your question, it's very difficult to absolutely get a handle on that, but I would say from what I have observed in terms of awarding meetings and such like, that the level of appropriate presentation is better, the accuracy of teacher estimates is better and such like.
And just finally, in terms of the role of the Principal Assessor, it's obviously a hugely important role. Is there any requirement from the SQA that that role would be somebody who is qualified in the subject as a subject specialist, or can anyone do it?
Principal Assessor?
Yeah.
No, Principal Assessor must be qualified in the subject. There is a Principal Assessor, someone who leads the examination team, is someone who is a specialist in that subject area, not a...
Must they be experienced in delivering that qualification then?
In delivering the qualification,
yeah.
Yes, they must have experience in delivering the qualification. Okay. They must understand, that, I mean, they must be a subject specialist, but they also must understand the delivery aspects as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Dr Allen?
Yes, thanks. I wonder if I could ask a wee bit about the connection between the qualifications that you administer and what's taught in schools, and particularly if you can say a bit more about the role and whether it's a changing role that the SQA has in determining how, I nearly call them the new qualifications, but the qualifications develop in future.
So the qualifications as they stand, obviously there's been a period of quite significant change to our qualifications over a number of years, and I think there's been a lot of work with the profession and with other organisations across the education system to develop the qualifications, and a lot of work in the context of the CFE Management Board and the implementation group over a period of time to ensure there was that alignment, as part of the broader Curriculum for Excellence programme, and that's obviously something that we need to keep an eye on as the qualifications evolve over time, and as we undertake our regular quality assurance and ongoing development process around the qualifications. Obviously, over the last few years, we've seen really quite significant changes with the introduction of the new qualifications and also more recently the removal of unit assessments. And that's something that we obviously need to keep an eye on going forward, just that piece around the alignment. But also, in terms of our responsibilities, ensuring that we maintain standards over time and that the qualifications remain on point in that respect. Robert, is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, I suppose the only thing I would add, in terms of the offering that SQA has, in terms of to support the senior phase, I think we feel very strongly, and I personally feel very strongly, that it's about that what we should be offering, celebrating and supporting is a mixed economy of provision, not just the traditional national course provision, but also other provision that can celebrate and support the changing nature of the senior phase. So things like awards, skills for work, national progression awards, that type of thing. We've got 80 teachers today at an event in Edinburgh, which I'm going to after this, supporting our new Scottish Studies and Scots Language Awards. And these are school teachers. And so that's, I suppose, illustrating the changing nature of the senior phase, and we're trying to develop and align our provision to support that.
I think one of the things that's been characteristic of the evidence that we've taken from Education Scotland and others about the issue of subject choice, which I suppose really turned into a discussion about the relationship between the broad general education and the senior phase, was at risk of oversimplifying matters, that the evidence that we got, or a lot of it, talked of matters as if the sphere of influence of Education Scotland was largely in the broad general education, and that the sphere of influence of SQA was largely in the senior phase. Now, I appreciate that's simplifying matters a bit, but do you recognise that there does seem to be a perception of those two different spheres?
I think I do understand the point you're making. I mean, I suppose my experience is that I think it's maybe a little different in the context of the conversations that SQA has been part of over a number of years with colleagues in Education Scotland and the Scottish Government and others in relation to the development and implementation of the new qualifications. Obviously, the SQA has quite distinct responsibilities around qualifications, but it also plays a part in broader conversations with our involvement in the Curriculum Assessment Board, which is effectively the successor to the CFE Management Board, the Scottish Education Council, and other fora. So, you know, I think we have a joint responsibility to ensure that those conversations are taking place right across the 3 to 18 curriculum. Absolutely.
I mean, for one example of what I suppose I'm driving at here is the debate there's been about the notional hours for different courses. Now, without going into the debate about how many hours people should actually study for each course, would you recognise that there is a certain danger of disconnect in the way we talk about all these things, that there has to be more cooperation between different agencies if talking about notional hours is going to be more than notional?
Well, I'm certainly very keen that there is absolutely cooperation across the different agencies in discussing these issues.
Yeah, I mean, if I can say, our qualification managers who manage a portfolio of qualifications within SQA, I think over the last few years we've been trying to actively engage more with our relevant colleagues in Education Scotland, and I think maybe to tell the story of what we're observing and to get some more intelligence in terms of what's happening in schools and to try and tie the two together. So there are, you know, in terms of skills being developed that in the broad general education that you can take into the senior phase, and that overlap between the two. I think there's a lot that we can provide to the education sector in terms of what we're observing and the stories that we can tell that can help Education Scotland and others in terms of curriculum planning and teaching and learning support and such like.
And the course reports that we're publishing, and a good number have already been published for this session, you know, do provide a huge amount of intelligence and insight in terms of our observations around how different qualifications have performed. And as Robert says, that's supplemented with ongoing conversation and collaboration across different agencies around all of that, which can inform the support provided to learning and teaching, and in particular, you know, our colleagues in Education Scotland, who of course are at the improvement agency in terms of the work that they do going forward, and the curriculum specialists that they now have in place to support that work.
I think that's an important area, that the fact that there are now curriculum specialists, you know, positioned within the kind of regionalised process, you know, within the collaboratives. So there's more support for teachers. It's not really just the teacher, then SQA. There's actually support in the middle as well. Because our primary responsibility is assessment support, but obviously there's a wash back and from teaching and learning, and obviously that's where Education Scotland need to also work with us in relation to that.
Since you mentioned the regional collaboratives, regional improvement collaboratives, probably got the name wrong there. I know that the one that, or I believe that the one that covers my part of the country is roughly the size of Belgium. Is it possible to collaborate between, this is a point that's been made by somebody else in the committee before, I think, but is it possible to collaborate between Campbelltown and Shetland meaningfully?
Well, I think colleagues in the Northern Alliance would say it was possible to collaborate, and there's evidence that that's going on. I mean, our work will feed into some of the work of the regional improvement collaboratives, but also will be, you know, as the national qualifications body, we're doing work right across the system, but we will play into other structures and conversations that are taking place in the best way possible, and conversations around what possibilities are there to do that are ongoing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms Smith?
Could I ask you, Ms Robertson, about National 4? Your predecessor, Janet Brown, said on 2 occasions when she was previously here that she felt a discussion had to be had about National 4, and I understand some of that discussion is ongoing at the moment. The big concern is about whether there is sufficient balance between, obviously, the important skills that young people learn within these qualifications and the lack of an accredited exam within it. We've, as you know, had teachers raising concerns that too many young people have been pushed into National 5 as a result of this. Could you give us your views about what has to happen to National 4 to reform it?
So there's, as you'll know, there's been a lot of discussion about National 4 over a period of time, and indeed, and I know that this has been discussed with my predecessor on a number of occasions when she's appeared before the committee. The SQA has been part of those wider discussions over a period of time, both through the Assessment and National Qualifications Group and the Curriculum and Assessment Board. And, you know, the Curriculum Assessment Board had at least 2, if not 3 conversations about National 4 and thinking about the way forward. And the SQA did some work to assess a range of National 4 and 5 course assessments against the Education Scotland benchmarks for literacy and numeracy, and just to ensure that there were no issues in terms of the required literacy and numeracy standards. And we also did some fieldwork visits to 40 centres, including focus groups with young people, teachers and senior managers during over a couple of sessions over 2016-17. And that was supplemented by a range of activity by other partners, including the National Parent Forum for Scotland, Scottish Government activity as well. Yeah, I mean, I think I would acknowledge that there are a variety of views about National 4. You know, there are some who feel strongly that there should be an external assessment. There are others who feel strongly there should be some differentiated award, so not just a pass or a fail. So I would acknowledge that there are a range of views, but there's also been, you know, there's also been a decision taken by the Scottish Government that the assessment approach is not changing, and that and obviously with the removal of recognising the interim measure of recognising positive achievement, RPA, and some adjustments to National 5, the conclusion of the discussion at the Curriculum and Assessment Board was that all parts of the system should work collaboratively to ensure that National 4 qualification is a credible qualification. It was developed as such, with a lot of discussion about the balance, the merits or otherwise of external versus internal assessment, and I'm obviously would acknowledge that conversation has continued over a period of time, but the SQA is working on the basis of the decision that's been taken, which is there are no changes to the method of assessment, and that we will play our part in ensuring that that National 4 is a credible qualification. You know, the qualification is 5 years old as it stands. SQA obviously undertakes some continues to consider qualifications over time, but I think the position in relation to National 4 in terms of the assessment method, I think is settled in terms of the decision that the Deputy First Minister has taken.
Could I just ask on that basis, I mean, this committee has been told twice that there has been a curriculum development board, and that obviously the different stakeholders, whether it's Education Scotland, SQA, Scottish Government, various other people involved in that. Could I ask you, who actually took the decision to proceed with National 4 without any accredited assessments and exams within it? Who was responsible for that decision?
So, obviously that goes some years back. These discussions will have taken place in the context of the CFE Management Board, considering the qualifications group that supported the Management Board at the time. Predates my involvement, and advice going to ministers, and as part of that advice, SQA will have provided advice at the time. You know, these were considered matters, you know, much discussion around the table at the time, but that was the decision that was taken, and a number of years ago, of course, in relation to National 4. Would
you acknowledge that in the interim period, we've had concerns from employers, for example, who feel that while the skills are extremely valuable, National 4 is missing some key components, particularly when it comes to literacy and numeracy accreditation. But would you also acknowledge that there are quite a number of youngsters who leave school after the end of the 4th year who might, well, not be going on to National 5 or higher or anything beyond that. Therefore, they are technically leaving school without accredited assessments. Are you comfortable with that?
Well, many young people with National 4 are progressing within school to either other national qualifications or other qualifications. So you know, and so we're seeing, you know, we do see that through the numbers. You know, as part of the Curriculum and Assessment Board's consideration, you know, there were some discussions with with employers, which again were actually positive, but also quite mixed. So that there were some mixed views. So you know, I certainly think in the context of, you know, the discussion around National 4, you know, there've been a lot of views offered, but there has been agreement that, as I say, all parts of the system should work to ensure that National 4 has credibility. There have been some changes to the fallback arrangements between National 5 and National 4, and we would certainly see it as a credible qualification that we need to work with the system to promote.
The final point, Convener, would be that, again, it's something that's been raised at this committee several times, that there is a group of young people who leave school at the end of National 4, perhaps not because of their choice, because they're career experienced or whatever, who don't have the ability or the facility to go on to take other qualifications. Do you recognise that that group could feel a little bit let down by the system, where there isn't the possibility to get, you know, an accredited qualification in basic literacy and numeracy?
Well, it is an accredited qualification. National 4 is an accredited qualification. I think the point you're making is around the nature of assessment. It's an internally assessed qualification. Many qualifications in the college and higher education sector are internally assessed. So that the nature of assessment in and of itself is absolutely a credible qualification with a credible assessment, process and method. And as I say, as part of the work that we did in the context of the Curriculum Assessment Board, we assessed National 4 course assessment against the benchmarks for literacy and numeracy, and concluded that the assessments are benchmarked against the appropriate CFE level, and there are no issues in terms of the required literacy and numeracy standards which might impact on the accessibility and subsequent success of learners. So I think we've done, you know, we've looked at those issues, and as I say, we're working within the context of the decision that's been made on National 4. Robert, is there anything else you want to add on National 4?
Yeah, I think there's a big focus on personalisation and choice in National 4, but there's still a requirement for candidates to meet the evidence requirements. And those evidence requirements in terms of skills and knowledge still must be evidenced, and we will quality assure these evidence requirements.
It's based on teacher assessment. It's not based on external assessment.
But from an SQA perspective, that's still accredited qualification. Still, we would recognise and devolve the responsibility for assessment to teachers, the way we would do with an HNC and an HND, and the way a university might do with its university lecturers, and therefore the lack of externality allows more of a focus on personalisation and choice. And I suppose the other thing to say is that we do see lots of good practice in terms of National 4 and young people benefiting from that experience, and setting it within the context of a wide range of experiences within the senior phase, not just national courses, but some of the other qualifications that I mentioned, like National Progression Awards, Skills for Work, Foundation Apprenticeships, and such like, that make up the senior phase. So National 4 is just one component of that, and I think it's a valuable component, and my understanding is that the decision has been taken for us to put our shoulder behind the wheel and try and encourage that view of its credibility.
Okay, Mr Johnson.
Thank you. First of all, Convener, can I just say that it's an absolute pleasure to be back at Education Committee, and in some ways returning to take evidence from the SQA, it's almost like I never left. And just to emphasise that fact, I'd like to bring up a line of questioning that I put to the SQA back in September 2016 to your predecessor, Dr. Brown and Ms. Robertson. So then I was asking questions about the deliverability of National 4 and National 5 within a single classroom, a topic which has in recent months become under scrutiny again. When I asked Dr. Brown about whether they were designed to be delivered in conjunction, she told me that they were not, and indeed she went on to say that if significant numbers of schools are delivering multi-level teaching, we have to start looking at content. I was just wondering if that work, to look at that content, to look at the structure of National 4 and 5, within the context of delivering them within a single classroom, has been undertaken by the SQA.
So, as I've highlighted, we do keep qualifications under review, not in the context of the form of assessment, but we do. And Robert can provide a bit more detail on the process around that. So we do look at how the qualification is performing, and issues around learning and teaching in that context are relevant. But we need to also ensure that we maintain standards over time. So there's a balance to be struck there between the practical realities of teaching in the classroom, and multi-level teaching has been a long-standing feature of Scottish education. There's no doubt about that. And how we look at the qualifications over time. And I mentioned in the context of National 4 being 5 years old, having a look at some elements of content which may, as part of that, look at the hierarchical structure of qualifications in that context. But I don't know if Robert wants to say any more about the detail of some of that.
Yeah, every national course will have a national qualification support team, which is made up of teachers who are delivering the programme and other associated stakeholders. For example, you might have university representations and such like. And certainly there will be a health check on the qualification, primarily the assessments and the application of the assessment standards and what the results are telling people. But there will be also a review about how the skills, knowledge and content are playing out here. And if there's a feeling that the content is so specific that it's precluding maybe more creative delivery, then there might be some consideration of that. But obviously, that's within the skills-based areas. It's easier to have that type of approach where you can set up a course on a hierarchical basis, and the responses from the students really kind of determine the appropriate level. Within some of the other areas, the more content-based subjects, that's a bit more challenging. So support teams will look at that, and if they feel there's a case to maybe try and create slightly more of a hierarchical structure, then that could be made in order to maybe deal with that issue. But there are challenges because it is content-driven, and you don't want young people doing one set of content for National 4 and then the same content again for National 5.
But forgive me, that's very much the problem. I mean, if you look at physics, for example, my understanding is that waves are covered in both National 4 and National 5 content. But when you're talking about National 4, the waves that are being dealt with are sound waves, whereas for National 5, it's EM spectrum. Those are completely incompatible. And more importantly, when I put that specific point to Dr. Brown in the evidence session that I'm referring to, and I asked, absolutely acknowledging the point that multi-level teaching has always occurred, but in the historic context, standard grades were explicitly designed to be delivered in a single classroom. And I asked whether or not National 4s and National 5s were designed in the same way. Dr. Brown was explicit. She said they were not designed along the lines of the standard grade. So I understand what you're saying in terms of ongoing processes to review the qualifications, but you yourselves acknowledge that's primarily around standards. So specifically, what work has been carried out to look at how deliverable those two qualifications are within National 4? And I'm not terribly interested in the ongoing process. What work has been carried out? What reports do you have on your desk, Ms. Robertson?
I'm not aware of any reports which pertain specifically to that issue.
Okay. Is that work that perhaps you would be interested in carrying out?
as I say, I think there's a balance to be struck between the role that we have, the distinct role that we have as the qualifications authority in delivering qualifications, and our understanding of the learning and teaching practice which is going on, which is variable given the as you will have as you have discussed at length in the context of the subject choice review, that schools increasingly we're seeing innovation and diversification in curriculum pathways, and that is leading to different methods of learning and teaching. And there's a balance to be struck between what we can do in the context of the qualifications that we offer around all of that. So I think it's important that I don't. I would acknowledge it, but I can't give an undertaking that magically, for the reasons that Robert has outlined across subject by subject, that some of these practical difficulties will be overcome by changes to the qualifications, or indeed that changes to the qualifications are appropriate.
I don't think I'm saying I want any magic to be done.
Yeah.
I just would like a bit of review work in terms of your ongoing process.
Well, as part of our ongoing process.
I just wonder if you'd acknowledge, though, that albeit I completely accept the point that the SQ is not solely responsible for the curriculum and the way it's delivered in the classroom. However, I think you'd acknowledge the point that the way that qualifications are designed has an impact both in teaching practice, but also in terms of the breadth of subjects which are taught in schools. So with that in mind, I was wondering what conversations you have instigated at the Scottish Education Council and other bodies looking at the breadth of subjects taught in the senior phase from your perspective of being in charge of how those qualifications are designed.
Yeah. So I referred earlier to the conversations in the context of the kind of the formal kind of fora that we have around Curriculum and Assessment Board, and also the ongoing conversations that we have with Education Scotland and the Scottish Government on these matters. You know, I think absolutely a greater understanding of the curriculum models that are in place across Scotland would be helpful. SQA statistics reflect entries for particular qualifications. We don't know if young people are those young people who are not taking our qualifications. We don't see. And I'm making an obvious point, but it's quite an important one. We can only observe what we see. Coming through the system and the qualification system. Of course, that's supplemented by the intelligence and insights that our subject implementation managers have, and the work that we do with the system. And as I've said, SQA is a part of the system. It doesn't sit apart from the system. It's absolutely part of the system. But I absolutely would welcome further insights around those curriculum models being developed across. And they vary, anecdotally in the context of the visits that I've undertaken to schools over a number of years in different roles. I've seen that innovation, which absolutely is a feature of CFE, that personalisation and choice around subjects and qualifications, not all SQA qualifications. And a greater understanding of those curriculum pathways, I think, is really helpful.
So I accept your description of your role within the system, and I accept that you're not fully responsible for all of these aspects. But can I ask specifically, given your point there, that the one thing that you will see is the number of entries in terms of the number of qualifications and the number of subject areas.
Yes.
So given the picture that we have all seen, with particular points around modern languages, for example, have you tabled a formal agenda item at any of these bodies to discuss those matters and to flag those concerns, given the evidence the SQA has and indeed is responsible for?
I have had some conversations around these issues in the context of my initial discussions in the 6 weeks that I've been in post.
Okay. Well, can I just finally urge you to take that forward in these bodies, because I think they're matters of real import.
Ms Mackay.
Thank you. Thanks, Convener. Good morning. Can I ask you a bit about the grading appeals process? I'm speaking specifically about a constituent who appealed and had extraordinary circumstances. I believe that's one of the the criteria for looking revisiting the grade, and they weren't successful. And the response I got was, quite frankly, incredibly confusing. And I just wonder if you could tell us a wee bit about that and maybe give us figures of how many successful appeals are made after exam time.
Okay. So we have a system of exceptional circumstances. So if a young person on the day of an exam is ill or is suffering from bereavement, or personal circumstances or family circumstances are such that may affect their performance, the school can put forward in exceptional circumstances, and that allows the SQA to look at a number of different sources of evidence, including any prelims, coursework, ongoing assessment that may have been undertaken within the school. And we take that forward between the point of exam day and results day. So for those that have put in place an exceptional circumstances request, that will be taken forward in the context of the normal exam timetable. So that young person will get their results on the 6th, well, in this year, the 6th of August, in the normal way. For other young people who may not get the result that they expected, and the school is of a similar view, the school can put in a marking request, and that looks at that does as described. Looks at the marks, looks at the component marks, and checks that everything has been done correctly, and that's taken forward after results day. For those young people who have a conditional offer, that's taken forward very quickly, and indeed that has now passed for this year, and then and further marking reviews are undertaken, and I think the timeline for that is at the end of this month.
So just to clarify,
yes.
If the school has to make the appeal along with the student or the student's parents or whoever, does the school have to be involved with that? We do rely on the professional judgment of the school to make that request. So it does come through the school. It's not done by an individual young person or their parents. Okay. Do you have any sort of figures that you could supply?
Yeah, I don't have the figures to hand. I'm happy to. I can furnish you with the figures. Yeah,
That's fine.
I can. We will not have the complete figures for this year because we're still in the process.
Okay.
But in the context of the overall, the overall number of qualifications that we so we're taking forward 790,000 exam. In terms of that, the exam volume that we look at every year, it's a small proportion, but it's very important that if on results day, if a young person there's a genuine surprise that we have the responsibility to look at that, and there's well-established processes in that. But it sounds like I'm very happy to look into that particular issue with your constituent if that would be helpful. But it sounds
actually happened last year, not just recently, but
it sounds like that was an exceptional circumstance.
It was
rather
extraordinary
than a
circumstances, but it was still turned down, and it was appealed by the school as well.
It wasn't.
So is there? Yes, it was. So is there any recourse in that? Once you make your decision, is that as far as it goes?
I think that is as far as it goes. Yes,
right,
it is, I'm afraid.
Because it wasn't transparent to the.
Well, I'm happy to have a conversation or some dialogue about that particular instance.
Thank you.
A quick supplementary from Mr. Key.
You'll know that a few years ago the system changed, and the cost of unsuccessful appeals was pushed onto the schools, and the result has been a very significant drop in the level of appeals from the state sector, a far smaller drop in the appeals from the private sector. Do you consider that fair and equitable?
So I know that's been a subject of discussion at this committee on a number of occasions with my predecessor. I think 2 points there. One is around the role of the school. I think is really important here, and certainly the EIS, ADES, and others have been keen to stress that no either marking review has not been taken forward given financial with financial issues in mind. Obviously, the previous system was an appeal system which was very heavily used and was unique to Scotland, and that change was taken forward with quite a lot of consultation, and ADES guidance was really pretty comprehensive guidance was provided to schools to ensure that the right decisions around a post-results service were taken by schools, and indeed that conversation was also taken forward with the Scottish Council of Independent Schools as well, who were keen to adopt in broad terms that guidance too. It relies on the professional judgment of the school fundamentally, the system.
But that judgment, all the evidence says that judgment means a student in the state sector is far less likely to have their result looked at again than a student in the private sector. My question to you is very simple. Do you think that's fair?
I think the system that we have evolved, including the role of the guidance that's been provided and the evidence that's coming through from the system, suggests that we're receiving no intelligence that post-result services are not being used because of issues relating to financial
Well, I can give you
considerations.
casework which says that it is. Do you think it's fair?
Well, I'd be concerned to hear that. I'd be happy to have a further conversation about that.
Okay, Ms Ross.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, panel. I just want to explore your communication and engagement with teachers. In the response to the committee's report, and I do appreciate, Fiona, you weren't in post at the time because it was in 2017, but in the very first one it says engagement with teachers, that you had a review. Did anything change as a result of that review, or do you plan to make any changes now that you're in post?
So I think I do think there's been quite a lot of developments there. So one significant development has been around the recruitment of subject implementation managers, which are absolutely the liaison point between the SQA and schools and colleges. And I've heard a number of teachers highlight to me that that's been working well in terms of the engagement that the SQA needs to take forward with schools and colleges. That's supplemented by a number of other elements around newsletters. You said we did, looking at course documentation and reducing, streamlining course documentation so that any changes to assessment are as simple and as straightforward as they can be. Regular user testing around our website. Obviously, a lot of our materials are provided through our website, and just to make sure that it can be, things can be easily found and easily navigated, and subject by subject pages, because of course subject teachers are looking at their subject on our website. In addition to that, and as Robert alluded to, a huge number of events and interactions with teachers to support the work that we do and the work that they do in their schools and colleges, and that's really important. And we've had some, and I think the paper that we provided to the committee provides further information about some of the feedback we've had and some of the customer survey information that we've had. I mean, my only addition would be to say that communication is something that you've got to continue to work at, and we're not going to be perfect. There's always going to be we're always going to get feedback which makes us reflect and review. But as I said at the start, I do want the SQA to be seen as an open, engaging, and transparent organisation in the way that it works and the way that it engages with the profession more widely, and we'll keep on that task in terms of making sure that we deliver on that.
Can I just say, yeah, I think how we engage is really important, you know, and I think the subject implementation managers last week, for example, I had a subject implementation manager talking to 50 principal teachers in the City of Glasgow, 50 principal modern languages teachers in the City of Glasgow, you know, offering them some support in terms of the most recent observations from the examination diet, but also setting themselves up for the forthcoming advanced higher and washing back into the changes that were made to National 5 and higher. So I think these type of teacher-to-teacher conversations has been a real success. You know, that we introduced that since 2017, you know, that's, yes, we have to maintain standards, yes, we have to make sure the qualifications are credible, but we also have to try and listen and engage with colleagues, not just teachers, but also other colleagues, as we've discussed earlier in the meeting, around the educational sector. So I do think how we engage is moving forward and the SIMs, the subject implementation managers, is an example of where we're trying to get a bit closer.
Okay, thanks. Dr. Allen touched on it before about the geographical spread, and I was interested to note that the two events that you've talked about this morning, one has been in Edinburgh and one has been in Glasgow. The teachers in the Highlands and Islands, how do you approach them? I mean, I represent the far north of Scotland, and most of the CPD or inset days, you have teachers having to travel to either Dingwall or Inverness. So how do you reach out to those remote rural areas?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. And I suppose factually our subject implementation managers have been up there. You know, that's the first thing we've done. We've physically got on the bus or the plane and gone, or the train and gone up there. But economy class, of course. But no, there has been direct engagement, and I've been involved in the process of discussing the work of the subject implementation managers and their schedule and what they do. So we have done that. We've obviously tried to harness technology as well, and we've tried to tie into webinars. I mean, in a lot of subjects, probably the webinars and audio presentations are as powerful as physical events. I mean, in physical events, you get the networking, obviously, and you get the face-to-face, but webinars you can record and keep, and the same with the audio presentations. So as well as the 89 events we're delivering between now and Christmas, we've also got a similar amount of webinars and audios. But we still physically, I'm happy to authorise subject implementation managers to physically go and meet with teachers in remote areas if we can.
Thank you. Ms Harris?
Hello, I would really like to discuss with you about the senior phase, the fall in the qualification numbers. When I was substituting last in this committee, we looked at subject choice, and the one thing that the government ministers and advocates kept telling us was that we were focusing too much on S4, and instead we should have been looking at the entire senior phase. So I did notice from the evidence submission that the average number of qualifications for children in their senior phase has actually fallen by about 10% since it was introduced. So do you think, what do you think has caused this, and, should we be concerned?
So I think I would probably refer to an answer I gave previously, which is what we see through the SQA data are largely young people who have been entered for SQA qualifications. So what the results day data will not provide is qualifications that are taken through other means. And that would include qualifications that are not from the SQA. So we have seen, obviously we've seen quite a lot of innovation in curriculum pathways. Young people, for example, moving into a college course in S5 and S6, and they will not appear on the results day qualification. So I think it's important to put the decline in the overall number of qualifications in that broader context. Now, the SQA doesn't hold the full system data, doesn't hold the data, but what we do is we provide all the data on SQA qualifications to the Scottish Government, and as part of that work, as part of the work that they are doing around Insight, which was previously the senior phase benchmarking tool, is to put that on the Insight tool along with a range of other qualifications. So that provides the kind of the leaver data, the qualifications gained at the point of leaving school, and that provides a wider picture. So I think it's important to put the decline in a bit of context, but I can't be definitive about the numbers there, because the SQA only has data relating to its own qualifications.
Okay, thank you for that response.
Okay.
Okay, I think that exhausts questions from the committee this morning. Thank you. That's been a really long session. I appreciate it's only a very short 6 weeks that you've been in post. So we really appreciate your attendance at committee this morning. Just before we move into private session, can I say that next week we'll hear from the Minister for Children and Young People and funded childcare for 2-year-olds, and then we'll take evidence from a panel of witnesses on the impact of Brexit on higher education. And we now move into private session.